It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad to participate here. But as I said, we're going to try to focus our conversation on the less technical aspect of AI. And I want to take the opportunity to share some of our lessons and some of the tasks or approaches we have taken in the last several years, especially as the technology evolved. I won't talk a lot about sensor. We just heard a great talk about where the devices are going. I will talk about, instead, care delivery and drug discovery. So when I think about AI, I think about how it can be applied, and I break them down into, tasks that it automate or capability that it augment. And of course, there's the autonomous, replacing the human aspect. I would say that I don't think it's ready for that. Would it ever be? That's debatable. I have never come across a patient who wanted a robot. And I mean patients who are sick. Now, that's very different from a wellness checkup, doing things that are, staying healthy can be. But I think, the questions of whether when you're sick you want a human touch or the robot would do, I think that's a separate debate. But I think about it, certainly automation and augmentations, and much has happened, and many, when it comes to automation, it's happening today, and it's doing a lot of things in healthcare and in your everyday life, and you probably don't even know it, and that's why it's automated. So a lot of what I talk about today will be about augmentations. Now, when it comes to what it does for medicines, I think about that in context of how it's increasing the efficiency of care delivery. You must have heard how wasteful our healthcare system is, and the cost, the trillions of dollars. And by the way, I think by 2028, the projection is it will be 21% of our GDP going into healthcare. It is unsustainable. So we got to deal with the efficiency. But I think productivity is a really important part, because as great as these devices will be, I believe human will be part of that care delivery pathway, which means productivity of that human has to be a big component. And then ultimately, if you are sick and you come to the healthcare system, you want to get well, we can do a lot of things, but only things that will matter at the end is if it's effective. So everything converges down to effectiveness, and that's particularly important in healthcare, because I can go buy my sneakers and socks. I can buy sneaker here and socks over there, or reverse the order. It wouldn't matter. But that changes everything in healthcare, because that matters. So the other thing that I want to remind you is that we love to talk about precision medicine, and there are many, many reviews and press that will say how much progress we have made in the last 20 years or 30 years, and I agree, except I would tell you that much of our progress has been on precision drug discovery and development. We forget that medicine is not medicine without care delivery, and we have done really poorly when it comes to advancing our ability to deliver precisely the right medicine to the right patient at the right time. So now how do you come together? National Academy of Medicine have this holy grail of learning health system. And the concept of learning health system is how do we bring these two things together? And it hasn't happened yet 30 years later. But certainly, precision drug discovery have advanced, and cancer genomics really have led the field, right? It's shown us that if you find the right target, that's the Achilles heel of that cancer, and you develop a drug that's precisely targeting the mutations, and you can find the right patient. Don't forget that part. Very important when it comes to efficiency, diagnostic biomarker. But you put those things together, you now have success. And if you look back and just look at lung cancer as an example, in the mere 15 years, we have increased the survival from 4 months, less than 10 months, to over 45 months. That is tremendous progress. And that's because we now have the ability, we have all these new drugs, and we are now no longer treating lung cancer as one thing, but we have the ability to separate and defining them on the molecular level. These are clinical trial data. Not every patient benefits equally. And this curve is I think you see that in every healthcare product, including devices, including just glucose measurements. But here I'm showing you an outcome data published by the VA system in a lung cancer treatment, IO chemo combinations, showing that in that population, the clinical trial would have predicted the outcome in red. But the reality is in blue. That is what we call efficacy decay post-market. That gap have many contributing factors. Certainly, what we consider external validity of the clinical trial, that pivotal clinical trial that led to FDA approval, is a big concern, and there has been tremendous push to increase the diversity and representations on clinical trial so that we can get data and results from these trials that are more generalizable and applicable to broader populations. But we also are well aware patient factors, access to the medicine, access to the right care, I'll come back to that, and many social determinants of health that we are beginning to understand how much they impact on the outcome. But we often forget that there are clinician contributory factors, and that's actually an area that I will focus on, because for these medicine to be appropriately and effectively administered, clinicians need to know about it. They need to have the expertise, and they need to have the capacity. And all these are areas that we believe AI can help, or technology in general can help. And this is a chart taken from Flare Capitals that was really published. And you can see they look back the last 10 years of AI investment. And, and you can see that the many companies and billions dollars has been invested. And you can see that there has been focus on clinical trials. We just talked about the importance of improving the external validity or engagement with patients to support their access and social factor there in impairing their access to care, but also clinical decision support. Clearly very important when it comes to keeping up with the rapid advances in medicine. However, I want to come back and say that it isn't just the expertise gap. If you take a look and compare what happened on clinical trial, where these amazing data comes out, and what happened in routine care, there's a big disparity in the capacity of the healthcare system. When you're on a trial, you have a dedicated research team that's very specialized. Their interventions are stipulated in the protocol and standardized so that you can compare. And because you have a research team on top of your clinical team, these patients are much more actively managed. And in routine care, these don't happen, particularly in majority of the healthcare setting that are not in major hospital or major academic center where there are significant resource limitations. And in fact, this is a major problem on the clinical side, a mismatch between supply and demand. I've just told you how amazing it is that with these new medicine using lung cancer, and we improve survival of patients in the last 15, 20 years. But imagine that back 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you had 1 or 2 5 drugs that you have to remember when you're treating lung cancer patients. Now you have many, and not to mention the combinations, and not to mention you have to now know who should get what, and the toxicity when you put all these things together in one body. And that means you need to know more, and you need more time to even take care of patients. Meanwhile, we know, or I should say, did you know that for the first time, the humanity, our populations, the line of number of individual under 5 years old and number of individual older than 65 actually cross. We are now older since 2020. So as you get older, you get more cancer, you get more chronic disease. So now the demand for healthcare providers increase, but we have a shortage. And not just shortage to just delivery care, much less keeping up. And on top of that, look at this statistic. Who wants to go into healthcare? It's no wonder that there are more people retiring than entering the workforce. So how do we increase the efficiency and the productivity of healthcare delivery? That's where AI comes in. And so obviously this is a huge topic. I want to share 2 examples, just one. So clearly decision support is a big one. How do we can't training a specialist take years. As is shown here, they got to go to school, many years of school, and then college, and then med school, and then they have to go to residency and train by learning. Medicine's rather tribal. It's kind of apprenticeship, so they learn on the job and being taught by the attending physician one case at a time, and eventually they become the expert. That's very slow. Now, can you accelerate that process, or can you make more of these experts by training AI system? But really mirroring the same way. Technology change, evolved and mature, but really the process is the same, right? We gotta input the knowledge corpus. We have to somehow teach the system. Yeah, they can learn by itself, but even with the LLM model, having a RAG to be able to extract and define those query document pairs is important to enhance and improve the performance of these LLM. And when it comes to healthcare decisions, it matters a lot. It's okay that you get the wrong cappuccino and latte from your barista, it's not from your doctor. So the bar is high. So we really need that accuracy. And the goal is that if you put these 2 together, now we can be much more efficient. Like the one expert can do more, or the expert that's at the level below can now function at the next level, which is great. But the 2 things I'm not going to talk about, but we'll come to in the panel, is as you realize that the doctor leave the training, they go into practice, they are expected and they are supposed to keep learning, which is challenging, which by definition means the system need to keep learning, and who is the one responsible, and how do we QC them? And should we QC them the same way we qualify human being? Or are they some species different from the human being? These are questions that need to be answered so that something like this can really be put into practice. And one of the things that we have learned over the years, from the genomic date, when I was very involved in the Cancer Genome Atlas, to working at MD Anderson and the UT system, is really thinking about the additional level of validation and testing when it comes to technology and software solutions for healthcare delivery. In other words, after you've done all your testing, alpha, beta, system, whatever you like, we often forget that we need to test the solution in the actual intended environment, because that intended environment affects how that solution is going to be used. For example, if the intended environment is in patient's home, like the devices we heard about in the previous talk, versus this is to be incorporated into clinic in care delivery, that is a very different testing environment. The workflow needs to be addressed. Who are the user? How do you educate and train them? And what about the validity of that solution in context of the environment, and ultimately, if you want to get paid, the utility of that solutions? And how do you keep improving that? And is your environment, Clinic X out in the middle of small rural community, have the necessary infrastructure to support the implementation of the AI solution? If the answer is no, then you are setting yourself up for problems, whether it's privacy or mistake or patient outcome, ultimately will suffer. And that's important. Also, I made this diagram to remind people, like I said at the beginning, this is not like buying your sneakers, socks. Orders matter. And we can have, and we have been building tremendous technology, whether it is the sequencer that allow us to, and the algorithm that allow us to call mutation automatically. This is literally an automated, autonomous automation process. The app that can capture symptom and maybe even do triage Certainly imaging. Tremendous advance they're using ML AI to identify lesion, maybe even better than the human. But that is not all medicine is. And when you're a doctor, sitting in front of the patients, you have all this information. You actually have to put them together and make a decision. Should you treat? Not treat? Treat with what? For how long? Those are, to date, it's not a science with a formula you plugged in. It's actually something more complicated, and maybe in the future there will be a formula. Until then, it's not. And I do see that AI, particularly generative AI, will increasingly help the human expert make those decisions because there are many, many parameters way exceeding what a human brain can do, but ultimately there's a decision here. And even if that, get to the point of almost automating, like detecting a lesion on a pathology slide, it really doesn't mean anything until someone do something. And I really don't think robots here to take care of the patient yet. So who is going to do something? And at which point? Among all the things that happened, and I think all of you have been in the hospital, at least many of you. I remember other people who were introduced to the healthcare system for the first time, and you look at how things happens behind the scene, you're shocked that actually something happened, that patient actually get treated because so many things had to happen simultaneously by so many people for it to happen. So who is coordinating that workflow? And by the way, that integration in the workflow is where the friction is, where the adoption is. And we talk a lot about all these amazing technology solutions that had great papers behind them, but there has been very little adoption in practice. Why? We forgot the human element. The human have to do it. Why should the human do it? I already told you how busy they are. Let's take an example, remote monitoring for cancer symptoms. Remote monitoring in chronic disease, diabetes, decades of data and significant improvement, particularly with the CGM, improving our ability to capture that data and use that data to inform management of the patient. But in cancer, that really hasn't happened, but it's not for lack of evidence. Here's great evidence. Work done by Ethan Bash over 10 years ago when he was at Memorial Sloan Kettering, showing that when you monitor patients for their toxicity symptom, they don't end up in the ER, and they have better survival long term. But how many of you have been to a cancer clinic and see that the cancer patients actually getting that daily monitoring or frequent monitoring while they're home because they're getting their immunotherapy every 3 weeks. They come back every 3 weeks. But who's talking to them? Who is monitoring them for symptoms? Because guess what? Those toxicities do not wait for doctor's appointments. And statistically speaking, it will happen when patients are not in front of the doctors. Why? Because when you monitor these patients, you generate enormous amount of work for the clinical team. 95% of the things that people complain about are not acute, don't need to be dealt with. And if you send all the data to the clinic team, they say, no, thank you. So what do? We think about this as realizing that, no, it's not good enough to have the technology to allow you to get the real-time data, because we think having that ability to have real-time data will change the outcome. Instead, we need to think of how to address the human factor, which is what we did, right? How do we staff with a first response team to filter out all the things that really don't need to hit the clinic team? And how do we use AI to make sure that those staff can actually function in a way that is very effective and like an expert, so that they can be efficient and economical. How much time do I have? Once we build this, now we have a human in the loop. What does that mean? What are the advantages of human in the loop? Human in the loop means we can now curate the data in real time. And that actually gives us opportunity to test AI solution. I won't have time to go into these examples. I'm happy to talk to all of you. For example, now we can implement an AI summary tool, but we have a human there to make sure, and until it's ready, we won't be putting it out to touch the patient care. And I'm going to go the last part quickly. It's also important that it allows us to engage patients in research. And why is it important? It's important because the effectiveness. Drugs today are developed based on data that are collected from a narrow subset of patients. Take CCGA as an example, that I just did a quick back of the envelope calculations and measurement, and look at that, the skill representations. And I can tell you almost all drug discovery and development pipeline decision uses this data set. And that means drugs are being developed for the white people, tested on the black people, and hope they work in brown people. It's just not a good idea when you think about effectiveness. And the reason is that I can tell you cancer is unique in every patient. And even if we give the benefit that every patient that ends up in a large hospital, which is all the hospital across the street, we still have a majority that's invisible to our farmer. That means drugs are being developed at best for that 20% and hoping they work on the other 80%. And by including them in clinical trials a little too late. The drug's already been made. So one of the things we do is, in terms of efficiency, I'm going to just skip this quickly, is to say how do we improve the productivity of drug discovery by being able to get to human data. Because if we cannot get to human data and understand what the 80% of the invisible patients are doing or why they respond or don't respond, instead we rely on the subset of patient or our mouse model or our tumor organoid in culture, we're going to find target and we'll make the drug. And in fact, we have technology to make the drug faster and better. But it won't work in human because we won't find the right patient or the right context to give that drug to the patients. So what we believe is that in order for drug discovery to be more effective and get medicine that are curative for more patients, we need to change our concept of now the next level. We've done great progress with precision medicine. Now we got to get to what I call dynamic precision. They have to be human-based data. It had to be dynamic, not snapshot. Doesn't matter how deep you're going to drill with that diagnostic biopsy. It doesn't tell you everything because the system changed. And we have to be able to be precise and be able to find the right patients. And the way we do this is now going back to our care delivery system. If we have a system that helps us improve care by providing the first response, making sure toxicity is addressed without delay, it also gives us a human in the loop to engage them in research. Now we can get more representative population in terms of research data and sample and put them through drug discovery and development. And those drugs that come out with such a system will be much more, will be developed for the diverse population and therefore more likely to work. And this is what the National Academy of Medicine wanted, a learning health system that connects patient care with drug discovery and development. So I'll end by summarizing that I hope I've given you some thought about how I see technology play in today's care delivery system. There is a mix. There are certain tasks that can be automated, but often we really need augmentations, and I don't believe we want to replace our doctor and nurses. And in terms of opportunity for all of you who are involved in healthcare delivery and research, keep in mind that billions of dollars has spent on AI company, but most of them are to develop algorithm and model, but at the end of the day, those models don't go anywhere without data. And it's very hard to get the data. And those companies that are best in developing model and algorithm are not the one who can get the right data. And that is, I believe, the opportunity. Think about how to capture the right data. And one of the challenges I know we want to talk about is going to be how do we get all this paid for? Thank you.
Thank you, Lynda. So we can probably take a couple questions while we set up for the panel, and maybe we can get the panel set up going while we take some questions.
That was a fantastic presentation, Dr. Chin. I mean, I'm in this space, and you hit it on the head, both from a top-down, just the challenges that exist. Like you said, it's 21% of our GDP. There's a massive opportunity for efficiency, productivity gains. And I like the approach you took, which is a very systems-based approach. It's not just piecemeal solution. How does it all work together to deliver the results we want? So absolutely brilliant. My question for you is, you showed a slide earlier that had it split out in terms of where AI is used in various categories. Some of it, you can say it's on the clinical side. Some of it is on the administrative side. Clinical side, obviously, a lot of it has to go through the FDA process, I assume. And what's happening there? Is there anything, is FDA taking a different approach? Is FDA being a hindrance? Because I feel like majority investments are on the clinical, on the administrative side and less on the clinical because it's harder.
Right, so the advance in the last decade, you want to set up? I don't want to, did you want to set up? Okay, really, is on the software as a medical device side, right? The algorithm for detecting, lesions or reading, CT scans and so on. And I think that system have certainly smoothed out, I should say. But when it comes to care delivery, I think that is still very new. The concept, how do you do the clinical decision support? How do you regulate that? Especially if you're talking about a generative AI LLM model power system. And in fact, we haven't even got past the point of how to compare them. We see these publications saying it's better than human. But they're not being tested in the reality. In real life, when you put them in the intended environment and use it on the intended user and take into account all the other factors that actually impinges on that decision, nobody have done that comparison. And I would say that it would be a different result. So I think that's still an area of learning.